All right, and we're going. And we can shoot the
And we're
shit for a
live.
bit too. I just wanted to get it started.
And we're back.
Yeah, we're back to whatever this is. Hopefully everything's coming through okay. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Was it the last time we did that? From the
everything for the last two
dungeon?
episodes has been good, except for the fact that I haven't put them out there. But
Oh.
with the next
Wait,
weekend
there's two that we
being
haven't posted?
just two, and I'm gonna take
Oh,
care of that
geez.
tonight and tomorrow.
Then this makes the third one?
This will make through, but then we can just
Oh.
be back on the. I take credit for that problem. We can
I
be back
I
on
was
the.
just saying, well, more for the I didn't realize it's like when we already have what, three out there?
And
I
we
didn't
had
realize
two
we've
out there to get.
done
This will be five, I think.
what? No, there's three already out there.
Oh
So
shit! Well,
yeah,
then this
this
will
will
be
be
six.
yeah, that's what I was saying. Well, for I
We're
can't
still kind
believe
of
it's been
figuring out whatever this is, but we're getting there.
6 episodes already, man. Yeah,
Um,
sorry I interrupted. You were gonna
no,
say.
you're good, man. You're good. I think since next weekend is Christmas and the one after that is New Year's, we just have a little backlog. We
Halloween.
just like boom, 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 just knock them out and then get back on a
Makes
regular
sense.
cadence.
I like
Um,
it. 2 weeks.
Oh my goodness, dude! Last week, today, so driving back from Iowa to Texas was a crapshoot. I swear to God,
Was it?
everyone's bad at driving everywhere. It's not
Mhm.
one state is worse than the
Especially
others.
during the winter. It
It
amplifies things.
it snowed on so the was it yeah Thursday snow day when
Hmm.
I was up there. Terrible. I saw two minor accidents just happen right in front of me, and in
Jeez.
like heavy snow weather, it's incredible how everything just happens in slow motion, right?
Hmm.
So all the fresh powder just came down within a couple hours, and
Yeah.
I think everyone just forgot that it was winter and forgot how to drive in winter. I was coming down um, from the west side of town where we work, right? And I was coming down, and I took a south road before. I don't remember what road it was. Doesn't matter. Going by the high school, and
Hmm.
people are. I'm stopped. I'm on the main road, and then there's the high school parking lot. And all the parents coming out, got their kids come. They're picking up their kids, and they're coming out. And there's this one SUV that comes out. There's two SUVs, one in front of the other, and the back one, blue SUV, is right there, just right on the back of the first one. And I'm like, what? I'm already a little trepidatious about what's
Yeah.
going to happen here. And
Oh
so,
no.
and the first car, no one hits anybody, which is good. Everyone came out okay. The first car goes and gets around the corner just fine. So they take it a little wide, but you got it. But the second car that was right up on the back was they were just going normal speed, just normal speed. But
Yeah.
everything was covered in like a solid half inch of snow, if not more, right? And you could just see them realize their mistake as they're starting to hit into the turn, and
Yeah.
they break way too late, and the back just spins,
Ooh.
and they go over and sideways, and they hit the curb, and the whole car just goes and then slams back down as it like continues to slide along the curb. I thought it was just gonna
Mm.
tip over, but it's just like boom, just smashes into the curve, and I was like, I hope that's a kid driving because that's embarrassing if you're the parent and doing that. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not judging. I mean, I'm judging a little bit. Um, and then immediately after, well, not immediately after them, but a good couple seconds after them, another car comes in, the last one in the line before the light switches, and they do the exact same thing. Not nearly as bad. It was just like it was a two-door town car or whatever, but it just
Sure.
bops and then goes. And it's like, guys, we all live here. Come on, it's not that hard. It's not that hard to
Oh, you
just
have several months to forget how to drive in it. When it gets better.
I had people even on that intersection. The guy behind me was like so close to me through that intersection and the next one that I was just like,
Yeah.
man, you know. The worst part is like I have no control over that. Like I'm going really slow. I'm
Mhm.
braking early and light and
Yeah.
long, and this guy's just right behind me. This Mitsubishi was just right behind me, and I'm like, just don't do that. You're gonna cause a problem for both of us. We just saw people
Yeah.
smash into this thing. Later on, there's a guy who gets in an accident, like right up over the median on the other side. And I'm just like, chaos, man. And then the next day,
Yeah.
as we were, I don't know if you saw this the next day, but I worked from home that day. I think our whole team did.
Mm.
I went driving a little bit for some errands, and it was just carnage, man. Just car
Yeah.
carnage everywhere. Just pieces of car here
Yeah.
and there. You could see tracks where people went up into yards. It's like, guys, it was the
Oh yeah.
first snow of the year. What's this is crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah. I was so I left. Let's see, did we left at the same time? I can't remember on that day.
Pretty much the same time, yeah.
Okay, that's right. So yeah, I wonder. There's potential that we saw a lot of the same accidents, but I drove by that high school and I was like, oh no, because that was around the time they were getting out. So then you got all these teenage drivers who, you know, are not great to begin with.
Yeah.
And then add on top of that the snow. It's making me nervous. Took, like an hour to get home when it usually takes
Oh
30
yeah.
there. And it's just I was just getting nervous. Like you said, it's the people that are behind you. And fortunately on some of the roads we can take going like north and south,
Mhm.
there's a lot less people, but man, it's
Yeah.
just I, I
I
was getting
I
I was maybe a block from home, and I had a
mhm.
situation where a guy was like getting way too close. I'm like, not
Mm,
here.
doesn't feel
I'm
good.
almost home. Don't do this. About the only thing you can do is make a lot of distance in front of you,
So that they just
and
push you,
then
but not into anybody.
well, not just that, but it gives you extra buffer if you break and you start sliding. You're not gonna hit the car in front of
Yeah.
you. But
Yeah.
if you don't, and you see them coming in hot, and you could like I usually watch, and I see, okay, well, it looks like they're not gonna stop. I can start rolling forward and give them a little bit of cushion, and
Yeah.
hopefully
Dude, I
maybe
took
a little bit. Oh,
I took Hickman. So instead of taking the highways, I took Hickman and then jumped up to Douglas, and I went out to the east side of town, Altoona. It took me an
yeah,
hour and a half, and I was just, and the worst part was like those roads were already busy,
yeah, yeah.
and just no one knew how to
It's
drive.
nuts because everybody
Today,
decided to leave at the same time. Apparently,
yeah, which fair enough. The weather just came in all at once, just all at once. So
yeah.
like you got to get out of there. But today was kind of nuts driving back through to Texas and stuff. I was in the toll. I took the when I got into Austin area proper, I took a toll road. I felt so bad because I still got my like Iowa plates and all this other stuff going on, and so I'm just assuming everyone from Texas is judging me. But I got on the toll, so there's the express lane toll lane, which is a one lane going one way. So there's 3 lane highway plus the fourth lane is just this isolated with the barrier going this
Mhm.
way, with a few exits and on ramps for people to get on and off as you're going through town, Highway 1 or whatever it is. Um, and so I'm going, and eventually this car gets right up behind me. And it's the main road is 65 miles an hour. The express lane is 70. And
Mm.
I was pushing 75 or so. And I was like, all right, this is fine. It's a good clip. And then this guy gets up on my back, and I'm like, okay, maybe I can go a little faster. It's Texas or whatever. Like, I want to be nice to this guy. I go a little bit faster, and he gets even closer and closer. And it's just like, there's no amount of fast that I can go that will satisfy this guy. So he's just right there the
Mm.
whole time. So I'm like, all right, this sucks. And then I look
Yeah.
over, and I'm getting passed by the people not in the express lane. Like I'm pushing. At one point, I was like on the straights because the roads curve and stuff, and I didn't feel comfortable going like 80 through some of those
Sure.
curves. But I was pushing
Yeah.
80, and there are people just zipping past me, going like probably 90, not in
Yeah.
the
That
express
was
lane.
in
I was like,
Austin, you
why am I
said?
even here, man? Why am I even here?
Austin, you
It's
said?
not rush hour traffic. So I got off, and the guy just went right past me. But dude,
That was
they go.
Austin, you said?
This is Austin, Texas. Yeah, I mean all of
Okay.
Texas
I've
drives crazy.
I've
I mean,
driven I've driven in Austin before a few
mhm.
times. I was the
um,
the driver of choice just because I didn't want certain people in my family driving.
you don't want them having to drive in
Safety
80 mile an
reasons.
hour traffic. 'Cause that's
Yeah,
what it
it
is,
was already
dude.
bad enough.
Everyone I
Yeah.
uh, I don't drive like, there is a section that I take on the way down to Austin. There's a part of the section I take where it hits 80 miles an hour is the speed limit. I go 75 to
Mm,
77. Like, I'm not gonna go 80 through there.
sure.
Um, but one of the things that blows my mind is how people just aren't super aware of the other cars around them and either try to do too much or too little to make sure
Mhm.
traffic keeps flowing. Because like if I'm in the right side, I'm
Yeah.
usually hanging out in the right lane. I'm not. I'm trying to keep with the flow of traffic. I'm not the fast. I don't speed very much anymore. I used to be a lead foot back in like college days, but anymore I'm just like I'll get there when I get there.
Yeah.
But I'll notice sometimes like if someone is lollygagging in the left lane and they're like neck and neck with me, and I just see a train behind both of us. It's like, man, just put a little bit of gas on and get past me. I'm not changing my speed, and that's one of the things.
Yeah.
So, like 4 times today, I thought I was losing my mind. People would come up, and this is a great topic for this episode, just ranting about traffic. Um,
Sure.
but there would be people that come up beside me, and I'm on cruise control. I'm sticking to the same like you go up hills, you lose a little bit of speed. You go down hills, you gain a little bit, but it's all in the same 3 or 4
Mhm.
miles an hour, right? And this
Yeah.
person would zip right up next to me, and we start going uphill, and they whoa, pull back down. Then we get to the top of the hill, and they zip right back up, and then go back down, and zip and zip and zip. And I'm just sitting here like, and there's people behind them, and the train is forming, and I'm like, you're making me look bad by association, buddy. Can we
Mhm.
get this rolling here? Just
I
just
think that's
just
the
just pick a
worst.
speed and go.
Is not just the people lollygagging in the left hand lane, but the people that will play the leapfrog game. I think is far worse because at least the person lollygagging, it's frustrating, but you can eventually get past that.
It's
You get around it
as
and you
long as
move
everyone's
it.
like kind of sticking with the same speed.
Exactly. The
That's the thing, is try not to
leapfrogger,
be
it's like
chaos.
you pass me, and now all of a sudden I'm catching up to you.
Yeah.
Why is this happening? And then I
What?
pass you, and then all of a sudden you're catching back up to me.
It doesn't feel
Hmm.
good. It feels
No.
frustrating.
There's
I
sometimes, especially on the way to work, where if it's clear that somebody is in a hurry and
mhm,
they're charging up behind me, sometimes I even spot it. I mean, I'm not super speeder, but at certain sections I'll go faster than the speed
sure.
limit. And when I see somebody and they're getting closer, and I keep looking back and they're getting closer from a distance, like okay, this guy's gonna be charging up on me. I'll sometimes just kind of pull off onto the shoulder for like a few seconds or so, let them pass, and then
Oh,
I
this
don't.
is like in those 2 lane roads where there's not a good passing lane and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The north and south. Well,
Yep.
actually,
Yep.
most
I
of the
know what
roads
you're
go
talking
back
about.
over the interstate, and so it's like especially on the way into work, I don't need that weighing on
Not
me.
to start the day. Not to start the
Yeah,
day, man.
I don't need
Yeah.
that kind of
Also on those
mojo
north south
weighing on me.
roads, kind of out in the country, there people are so. One of the things, this is maybe a bit of like some weird psychology or whatever, but I get like a certain like vindictive satisfaction when someone is just like sitting on my ass. Oh my goodness, there's on the way out of on the way out of the town we work in, our office is in. There's a ramp up going south out of town. You got to like it goes 25 to 35 to 45 to 55 the speed limit, right? And like I'll just be working my way up to 45, and I think last week I had someone just come at me like right at they went from 25 to 55 just gunning it, and they passed me before we even got to the 45. And it's like, okay, fine enough.
Before you
They
even got to
didn't.
45,
Yeah, yeah,
Jesus.
they were passing me at like speed before I even got to the 45-mile-an-hour sign. And then we get down the 5 or so minutes to the main highway that's on the other side. Uh, and guess who's at the stop sign right in front of me? That person. You made no time. Like
Yeah.
the it's one of those things where it's like eh, I when I think about all the stuff, and you can watch this, and maybe it's a confirmation bias for myself or whatever. But when I watch people drive and they do all the crazy crap and the switching lanes all the time, trying to go super fast and getting around stuff,
Hmm.
um, and then I notice like 5 miles down the road, we're still like there are 2 cars ahead of me, maybe, or we're in the same
Yeah.
spot, or we pull off and we end up at the same gas station. They get out like at the same time I do, or whatever. It's like, what time? How much time did we actually save with all that headache and all that chaos and all that like mild, if not extreme, amount of danger we might have put ourselves in? You don't gain that much. You really don't
Right.
gain that much by going. It, you don't gain much the more it's the gain for the amount of risk you put yourself through is really not there, especially when you're on
Right.
these big roads and commuting and stuff. I just for me, I just get on my spot and I try to go speed or 5 over the speed, whatever the flow of traffic is, right? Stay out of the way, stay in my one lane, don't move, don't try to change lanes, keep space between me, and just go. And I get there as fast as anyone else does,
Yeah.
90% of the time. Now you'll have the one crazy guy who's going 20 over the speed limit and is weaving in and out like he's freaking he's like he's
Yeah.
at the Indy 500 or whatever. And you know what? Fair enough. You might get there 20 minutes earlier than me. And that's but
Well, the
unless
thing
you're
is,
willing to
like,
do that, don't fuck
if you
around.
do, I mean, the thing is, if you do the math, you can't achieve a significant gain of time on those short distances. I mean, even taking 30 minutes to
Mm.
get home from work, I mean, I can't even
You might save a minute or 2,
2 minutes,
but
maybe, yeah,
like
if you're lucky.
you're
But it all
saving
kind of washes
seconds on the.
out. Yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
the
because the north south roads we've got, and depending on where you go, there's like certain stop signs that
It is a
cross.
bottleneck where you can't control how much traffic is
Yeah,
going to be when you need to hop across that highway, right?
exactly. And if you're sitting there for 4 minutes and you
All
good
the
job,
game,
you gained two, you lost four.
yeah.
It's like it comes out,
And then on the
yeah.
other
But
side, like if you're doing like a long road trip, if you the longer your commute is, whether it's minutes or hours,
mhm,
the less each individual minute matters, right?
right,
Like I take an extra, maybe I'm going 65 instead of 70 for a couple hours.
hmm,
That's for 2 hours. That's 10 miles and 10 minutes, right? 10 to
yeah,
15 minutes maybe that I've gained or lost. That's I was gonna lose, gain or lose. I was gonna spend those 15 minutes no matter what. This is a maybe we can talk. This is an interesting conversation I had with my buddy Michael. This past week when I was up in Iowa, I was kind of talking about how like I don't like the idea of or the what was the adage? It's like spending our time is a weird concept to me because like we
hmm,
don't you can't save time, you can't invest time.
yeah. It
Y-
goes regardless, so you can't.
yeah, you just have it. Like it's there and you're gonna spend it.
You have it or you
Like
don't.
it. So why stress about minimizing and maximizing, or do stress about it? But like I just where did I end up with it? So it's kind of like that idea of like I'm gonna the time's gonna pass no matter what. Like I'm gonna continue to move through time, and I'm gonna get older, and I can't do anything about saving or spending it. So just worry less about worry less about like the the abacus of it all, and just kind of just do things. Give it a shot
Yeah.
or don't give it a shot.
And if you're gonna get heavily invested in something, understand that there's a time uh
Mhm.
input for that, and decide whether it's worth that or not. And then you can prioritize your time based off of what you feel strongly about. If that means that it's spending time with friends and family, people you love, that's a that's a pretty good time investment. If it's something that's pointless and you know nonsensical, maybe not a great time investment. Or I like to put a lot of effort into certain tasks that make my life more efficient, and that's for the purpose of gaining future time to do things that I enjoy more or value
Yeah,
more.
yeah.
So I
It's
put a lot of energy into that so that I can have, it's an investment.
I just finished this book called Ancillary Justice by an author named her name's Anne Leckie, and I won't get into the details of it. It's one of the best books I've ever read. It was so good.
Mm,
And specifically for me, it brings. I know I've talked about this book. I think every episode at this point, but there's a book called The Left Hand of Darkness, which is by Ursula Le Guin. Again, I recommend that to everyone. But Anne Leckie's Ancillary Justice pulls a lot, I think, of influence from The Left Hand of Darkness, and I didn't know that going in. And so as the story
mm,
progressed, the writing, all the world building, the narrative, the characters, everything, both in the universe and the way it was written, just kind of slowly and in more broad jumps, pulled ideas from stuff I've read before. And not knowing
mm.
that ahead of time was so satisfying when it all kind of came together. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is so cool. I've seen this before. I know where this is coming
Right.
from. That feels really good. But one of the things in there, the story captures moments and narratives across large amounts of time, days, years, and millennia. Um, and one of the characters is spending a lot of time planning and executing, right? But then there's this common theme of like her planning is less about executing specific steps, but about setting up the dice to be rolled and then rolling the dice and
Mm,
seeing where they fall. And then so many times the main character, she says like one step, one foot in front of the other, one step after the other, and it always has been and always will be kind of thing. Where it's like you do everything right. You could do all the work to plan, you can do all the work to minimize inefficiencies, you can do all these things to mitigate risk and load the dice, but the dice will fall and you'll take a step,
mm.
and all that matters is the next step, and all that matters is the step after that. And that hits so true that like just for me, it was really cool to think about because you start to apply that to work, to life, to all this other stuff. And I think we talked about this a little bit, where it's like plan out when you want to accomplish something or do something. can spend all your time planning and trying to navigate the ins and outs of
Mhm.
what it should take to do and get to the outcome.
Yeah.
But you're still always presented with that first step. And then once you've taken that
Mhm.
first step, it's the next one and the next one. And it is only the fact of the matter is it is only ever the step in front of you that you have to take. Nothing else
Right.
exists, nothing else matters. And it's that one step you got to take. And it's just like, ah, man, I wish I could just have that
Yeah.
like that quote just replay automatically in my brain once every like 6 hours. Be like one step. It's just always it's one step to the next. Always has been, always will be. I'm like, oh yeah, yeah. Nice and
Yeah.
relaxed. Can get back into it.
And there's some efficiency in that of just the doing rather than the
Hmm.
planning. I mean, there's for sure planning that needs to be done. You don't, I mean,
Yeah.
you have to have a little bit before you get started, but there's a sense of, the doing also gives you the feedback to plan for the next iteration. And
Yep.
so, we've said it and heard it a million times of just the, the, the fail fast, fail often, the constant feedback
Hmm.
both keeps you moving and planning at the same time. And it's highly efficient. I mean, it's a lot of there's a lot of different examples where that makes sense. A lot of like training for martial arts is a lot of just like the sparring is you just keep doing, you learn from that as you're doing that, and you learn how to get better over time.
So it's interesting that you talk like with the efficiency or inefficiency angle of just doing things, of projects, of
Hmm.
time spent, energy doing stuff or whatever. Uh, Similar to the idea that we don't really spend time. It's pre-spent. It's like we are here and we're gonna die and we're gonna be moving through that flow of time and then onward,
Yeah.
right? Whatever is us afterwards, disseminated, particles back into the universe and all that blah blah blah, right?
Hmm.
That's already kind of set out there, and it's a matter of just working through it and with like it and accepting that like you don't really have time to spend. It's already spent. Like you're here, you're on this
Yeah.
path. The same thing with I think is important, and especially when it comes to some a little bit more concrete and less nebulous with work and software. A lot of times, not to talk about work stuff necessarily, but it's something I am really like stuck in on is this idea of like when it comes to the work that we do, and I think this applies to software, construction, whatever you want to apply to. I just know software mostly. You're going to make mistakes. There's going to be inefficiencies. There's going to be refactoring. You're going to rewrite code. Things are going to break. You're going to have bugs. You're not going to
Hmm.
hit timelines. All those things are a guarantee. And it's not about planning to not have those, but just to be able to handle those when they come up. Right. That's
Yeah.
the most important part about planning. And we were having some conversations this week, and I think when we were going through some of our work, one of the things that we really landed on was not necessarily asking how big is something or how long is something going to take, but more what are the risks involved? What are the unknowns that we can identify now that might help us be prepared for when they come up or other things come up as we start working on those work items? And
Hmm.
that's and talking about like efficiencies and inefficiencies. Every process is going to be inefficient. That is physics. That's like that's the idea of entropy, right? Is every
Hmm.
time an action is taken and a reaction occurs, some amount of it's an inefficient system,
Yeah.
and so some amount of energy is going to be lost as heat, right? That's chemistry, it's physics, and to not accept that in kind of every element of what we do is just kind of setting yourself up for failure. And you can
Yeah.
create an analog for a reaction with anything. A good example in my mind, what I like to use in the world of soft skills, which is what I'm supposedly supposed to be professional at, is conversation uh, has inefficiencies. I think we might have talked about like front brain, back brain, or whatever the silly analogy that I had. But it's
Hmm.
kind of like a conversation is a series of reactions. I give you an idea, and you have to process that. And in the transition of one idea from my idea of an idea from my head through my mouth to your brain, and then processed, right? That's a reaction, and in that is like the game of telephone that you play as a kid. You lose information, you lose fidelity, because I have some idea that I have to give shape to language, and language is confined and not unlimited. Um, and I might be able to say one idea better in one language than another, but you don't know all the languages I know, and I don't know all the language, blah blah blah, right? But we have this one shared set of rules that's not perfect, and so I try to put my ideas into this box, shape it, and then give it to you, and you have to take it, translate it, process it, and then go from there. And every step along the way, we're losing some of the fidelity of what I was trying to say. And
Sure.
yeah, sorry. The point of what I'm saying is when it comes to a lot of stuff in life, I feel like I've run into a lot of friends and family and workers, coworkers, and work environments where accepting that inefficiency is just part of the deal, and that it's more important
Yeah.
to not hide from the inefficiencies, but to try to navigate and mitigate them, and learn how to work around them. That's the challenge of any sort of circumstance.
And what's funny, and maybe I don't know if ironic's the right word, but the more you try to resist
Hmm.
that understanding, you become inefficient because the more you get seized up by trying to pre-plan and you know uh prepare yourself for all these things, you spend more time than you do
Yeah,
doing.
yeah.
And so it's not to say that thinking and planning is a waste of time. Obviously, again, there's points to that, but oftentimes people, the diving in head first sort of thing is still there,
My
you
my
video
camera just
pause.
crashed.
Oh.
You can hear me though,
um
right?
yeah, you just kind of stopped at a funny
I
place.
froze. Yeah, no. My camera disconnected. Here, give me a second.
Oh.
High technology here, man. High technology.
I
Um,
thought you look like you're poised to jump in with an idea, so I had to kind of.
no, you keep on going, but I want to try this again. Um, leave site. Yeah, get me in here. Password. Join the camera, and my camera is working again. Okay, excellent.
I
This
don't
is the
see you
fun.
though.
Unfortunately, all those dings came through on the audio, but that's okay. That's it's part of the deal.
That's what editing's for. All right, you're back.
All right, I'm back. Where did we leave off?
Little technical difficulties. Oh, I was saying basically like diving in head first. Yeah, there's some value to that, and to becomes more efficient. And it's, I don't know, it's kind of an interesting interplay of planning and doing, and that kind of cycle. And it's funny because uh, something like being a programmer, let's say, or I mean any profession is you don't know what you don't know sort of thing. And
Mhm.
so you can try to spend a lot of time, whether it's going to school to learn something or whatever, to basically again pre-plan. But it's not until you get your first job, you get your feet wet, and you
Yeah.
learn a lot, and it's like, oh, okay, it's kind of the hard knocks. You
Yeah.
learn some things, and then your next job, because by virtue of doing, you've then
Mhm.
learned something, and you can incorporate that into the planning of when you go to your next job. It becomes so much more efficient because you know the things to look out for and the things to ask. I mean, just even in this job that I think I'm around 6 months ish, pretty soon.
Is it only
And
6 months
so
for you?
yeah,
Dude,
isn't
it
it
feels
like
so much longer. I'll tell you.
it does. It's strange, but it's one of those things that you'll invite me to meetings sometimes, and I'm like, I don't know anything about this yet. But you always say, and I think this is kind of implied too, is that it's like it's not just like about what specific to this job, but it's like you've been around long enough to know the questions to ask or the
Yeah.
things to look out for. But it's not something I pre-planned. It's just something I learned just by doing.
You
So
learn by doing.
there
It's
you go.
interesting you talk about like getting invited to like at work, getting invited to meetings where you just have no idea what the domain is, like this part of the domain, or
Mhm.
what questions to ask. I One of the things I'm trying to be good at, and I have phases, and that's maybe a side conversation actually to have. I'm gonna try to pin that real quick and come back to that of phases of being effective and ineffective at a job. But one of the things I try to do when it comes to like our job in particular, like we've got one guy on the team who knows like most everything, but even then, there's certain stuff that we were talking about this last week that he's like
Mhm.
learning along with the rest of us that doesn't have as much
Okay.
knowledge in, and the rest of us are learning. And one of the most important things, or one of the things that's a challenge for me to do, is to leverage the value of when someone says I don't know, right?
Mm.
if I ask a question, not knowing an answer is itself a valid answer, right? If I'm able to ask you guys a question about some of our like the stuff we were talking about with our stakeholder Justin, right? I'm talking to him about stuff, and I ask you guys a question. You guys are like, I have no opinion whatsoever about this thing. That's not a bad
Mhm.
thing. That's not an issue. Like that just tells me that gives me a hook, something to grab onto as like a facilitator
Sure.
of conversation to be able to try to dive in because that tells me where we're at almost. It's like we have no, not even fundamental, foundational knowledge, and so we need to
Mhm.
start from the beginning, and 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 that's okay. Like we don't need to power on and try to get through all this arbitrary information when it's just
Yeah.
gonna be filtered out because none of it means anything. We need to have that foundation. So it's I don't have a point with where that was going. That was just agreement with what you were talking about. I did want to get
Yeah.
your thoughts on this a little bit and wonder if you ever feel this way. I feel like I go through phases of being good and bad at my job, and it's not necessarily like I'm learning new skills or learning a new domain. Like nothing might things might not change. I just might be better at executing on the skills that I already have, or worse at it on any given day.
Mhm.
And it's something that gets in my head a little bit sometimes where it's like, man, I really wish I was more consistent. And I
Mm.
because like I'll have times where I'm just really on the money with and tuned in to asking questions, being able to get answers from the team, processing that information myself, and helping like navigate a lot of the technical stuff with you guys. And then there are some days where it's just like it could everything could be the same, and I'm just not there. It's just not clicking. It's like almost in sports.
Yeah. How long have you been working at our place of employment?
I am a year
Under
and a
2 years?
month and a half.
Okay. So for one thing, that's not necessarily a long time if
That's
you seem
true,
well versed.
especially
Granted,
with some of
I
the people
mean,
that have been here for decades.
yeah. And our system is not near as complex as the place that shall not be named, which had, I don't know, I think at one
Dude,
count, because I put this on my resume, I think it had, at least that I was responsible for when I was production support, it was well over 20 like websites and systems and processes and all
that's
that. So
insane.
that was a lot. And I learned by diving in head first, but
Yeah.
this job doesn't have as much, but that's not to say that, under 2 years is not, I would say, not enough. If you had more time under your belt and you still felt that same way, it'd be a different story.
Maybe you do. Yeah.
The other thing is, as you know, recently we've been asked to help out with other systems that aren't, like, I wouldn't say part of our wheelhouse, but they're not integrated into what we're already
Yeah.
doing. So there's maybe a sense of that as well, kind of looming on the horizon. But I watched something. I watched a short recently with, it's like an actors roundtable or something like that. And it's
Okay.
Tom Hanks. It was just this slew of those. I get this happens sometimes on Instagram, especially where it's these short videos that have this like emotional music and
Oh yeah, the
somebody
big
saying
swells
something.
and the
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's
the
just like
motivational.
I can't watch very many of those because it feels so, like, I don't know, it's too sugary for me.
Manufactured, too sugary. I like the way you said that.
Yeah.
Dude, there's sometimes um I don't get it so much anymore. I have been working really hard on, getting into shape in the last 8 months and stuff like that. And so I've really enjoyed getting into like fitness Instagram stuff. And there's like reels and content that comes
Mm,
up that's got that like, oh man, it's like I'm gonna say a name that I don't like this guy. He's a piece of shit. Andrew Tate. I'm sure you've heard of. He's an absolute dog shit person, right? But there's a lot of like diet Andrew Tates on like in the
mm.
fitness internet culture, and sometimes they come up on
Yeah.
Instagram, or there's these like rise and grind, the grind set Instagram accounts and stuff like that that'll come up,
Oh
or
god.
YouTube or whatever, and like
Yeah.
those are so exhausting because they're sugary in their own way, right? Like
Yeah.
they're just so overloaded with nothing at all, and it's like,
Yeah.
dude, and the worst part, um, so, uh, have you heard of maybe this is just gonna be, text shitting on internet personalities that he doesn't like for a minute or 2. Jordan Peterson, have you heard of him?
Yes.
Okay. I think he's very much an idiot. I don't think he is not there. He says some things sometimes that are pretty interesting. But the problem is someone else said him first and better, and he's just a dick. And that's one of the things I feel so bad is like there's some Instagram reels and stuff or YouTube content or whatever. Those Instagram is the main one that I'm on. I'll even see it on Reddit sometimes too, but like it's
Yeah.
just you see it, and I'm like, "Man, I click with this," and then I just his voice starts to settle in. I'm like, "Oh, that's who damn it.
I
Damn it."
tend to avoid his stuff. I understand that there are some people that like him. I won't. Uh, I don't. I
He's
won't ascribe anything to any of those people, nor will I ascribe anything to him. But I will say that I just avoid
That's
any of
fair,
his
that's fair.
subject matter.
I respect that. I avoid it as much as I can, um, except for sometimes it comes up.
Hmm.
He has a quote, the quote that comes up a lot on the reels that I get involved in are,
Clean your room or something like that.
not so much the clean room one, it's the one about, like, the thing about life is you're all in. You know, you're here for it, man. You're gonna live and you're gonna die or something. So it gets like I don't know what the hell he's talking about, but like I was when I hear it, it's like oh yeah, that clicks. Like it's also a
Yeah.
statement of fact. It's not necessarily a super crazy thing, but then it's like oh yeah, it's Jordan Peterson who's like overtly like misogynistic and just not a good guy. Like he doesn't say good things and doesn't really
Yeah.
advocate for like it's he's got a weird vibe and I don't like his stuff. But damn it,
There's
sometimes he has a
something
quote
about
that's like, yeah, you just
I think one of the things that him and others and the like, and the reason why some of that stuff is too sugary is I just don't like people telling me what to do. And like,
Oh,
you
dude.
know,
Okay, the clean your room thing with Jordan Peterson. I saw a snapshot of something from he was in a call, some Zoom call or whatever,
mhm.
and it was I think I saw this on Reddit or whatever, but it was a picture. I'm confident I saw this on Reddit. It was a picture of him in a call, and the maybe it was an interview or something, but the background, his room, absolute disaster, just a horrible mess.
Yeah,
And and I
makes
was
sense.
talking with I was talking with my buddy. One of the things about I think Jordan Peterson that bugs me, and a number of others, especially when you start getting into like the billionaire types too. It's the folks who struggle, who say one thing but don't really they espouse one set of like morals or ethics or whatever, but then they don't really like follow through with it. And it's not
Mm,
necessarily the lack of follow through because like uh, everyone can have great insights. Like sometimes the center is the best preacher, right? Like everyone can have incredible insights and
true.
things worth saying and hearing sometimes depending on context and all that stuff. And so like someone can say something and their lack of follow through on that ethics doesn't necessarily invalidate the ethics itself. There's a whole conversation like, that's kind of
Yeah.
starting to step into like death of the author, right? Where like the
Mhm.
words can be you can look at the words in multiple ways, and one of the ways to look at them, not necessarily that any one way is the right way, but death of the author says like let's set ourselves in a scenario where the person behind the words doesn't matter. It's just the words themselves that are
Yeah.
said that are
Separate the
important.
author from the artist thing.
And that's a strategy. That's not like one the right moral way. That's just a strategy to understand something, right? It's like a hammer and a nail and a drill and a screw. Um, but anyways, I was having this conversation with my friend last week about it, and I think the issue that I have a lot of times with folks when there is that hypocrisy or the lack of follow through present, blah 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 blah, is just not acknowledging it. Uh, I'll use so we're all I think talking about everything being inefficient and everything being uh yeah, every interaction has entropy to it. Every interaction, every reaction, everything that we do is not perfect. It's going to be inefficient, and accepting that helps us navigate. It's like it's like accepting the inequities of life, not inequities, incongruities. The incongruities of existing as a person and not
Mhm.
necessarily requiring those incongruities to be resolved helps live a more full life. And one of the challenges, one of the people that I really enjoy, I'm sorry, I'm just on a tirade today. One of the people I really enjoy listening to and hearing what they had to say is this F1 racer named Sebastian Vettel. I don't know if I talked about this last time or not, or at any point, but he just retired this year. from Formula One racing. He's a German guy, and four-time world champion, credible racer. And one of the things he's a really he's a climate change activist, right? Like he wants to help get the social and practical realms of human existence kind of on board with being a little bit more conscientious about our impact on the environment and doing better about that.
Mhm.
And he's had people from the media, I would say, lazily call out the fact that he advocates for these for climate change policy and all this other stuff, but is a Formula One racer and is the face of the car industry and the cutting edge of the car industry. And one of the things
Yeah.
recently this year he highlighted was like, yes, I am a hypocrite, and I don't just like that alone, just like accepting that, but not backing away from. He said, "I'm a hypocrite," and I think ultimately he was basically saying like, "I'm working through that." And part of him working through that is retiring from Formula One to go be with his family and
Yeah.
follow his advocacy. Um, but like to be able to say to be able to acknowledge hypocrisy and then just I don't know. I lost my thread, but
I
that's one
wouldn't
of the things that
necessarily
bugs me
say
about people
he's
like
I wouldn't necessarily say he's a hypocrite though. I mean,
I wouldn't either. I disagree with that. I just think
I
it's
think
interesting that he's
that's
able to call out that incongruity and
yeah.
deal with that. And I think people like Jordan Peterson will, when presented, and this is something that I think a lot of people struggle with, especially those that are more conspiratorial minded, um, when presented with the incongruity, right? So Jordan Peterson
Mhm.
says one thing and thing one, thing two, and when pointed out that they're incongruous or whatever or something, is going to try to like back out of it and back into some weird mental gymnastics to connect those dots
Yeah.
instead of
Yeah,
just
that's a lot of
accepting the incongruity.
I mean, yeah, that's a lot of it's a larger conversation. That's a lot of
Yeah.
how a lot of gaslighting works, how a lot of people justify voting for the people that they vote for in the face of facts and whatnot. It's like my guy's better than your guy, and the inability just to
But
look
start with an
at
outcome and back into that.
and yeah, and an inability to look at people as nuanced and look at things policy by policy when it comes to politics, etc. I mean, yeah.
Hmm.
So to circle back,
Yeah,
I
I'm so
didn't
sorry. I had like 10 thoughts
I
through
didn't
there.
finish this short. Yeah, I got off on
Oh,
a
yeah,
tangent
yeah,
too.
yeah.
The short that I was talking about, it was Tom Hanks and it was Robert De Niro, etc. It doesn't really matter. Tom Hanks is the one talking, and he said something that he learned somewhere, whatever. One thing that he liked to think about a lot was the term "this too shall pass," and he said he
Mhm.
talked about it in terms of um, he's like if you're feeling bad, you're feeling down, it's important to think that this too shall pass, give things time. And he said, and that's not to say that that's not for just bad things, it's good things too. There's something that you really like or something that you feel good or proud about. It's important to remember that that shall pass. And excuse me, it reminded me, I was reminded of that when you were talking about how you felt. And you wish that you felt more consistent about whether it's work or whatever, but feeling comfortable and confident
Mhm.
and just kind of yeah, I mean that stuff
This too
kind
shall
of
pass.
comes and goes. And it's also, it's like that stuff's good. I mean it's like sometimes you need to be humbled. So sometimes, you're feeling pretty good. You feel good, that's good. It
Right.
reinforces that you're on a right path, that you're learning something, you're getting better at something.
But the
And
like
then you get
the
smacked in the
doubt can
face and
be
it's like,
yeah.
okay, maybe I got more to learn. It can kind of humble you a little bit. But
And
yeah,
it
I
feels
mean,
good to be humbled effectively, right? This is one of the reasons no, that's not a full thought. I want to put that aside for a second. But the
I
humbled
think another
effectively
thing,
thing is super. Go ahead.
yeah, well, and another maybe way to look at it is sort of, I know you and I have talked about it, maybe not on our show, but it's like the you want to you know that life is suffering, but you want to minimize the suffering, and so
Oh yeah,
the
like
sort of like
stoicism and
ebbs,
hedonism and
yeah, and so the ebbs and flows, maybe that you were talking about, they become maybe less drastic over time,
hmm.
or you maybe are able to kind of like lift the bottom of the suffering up a bit by
Yeah,
virtue of
it's
yeah,
almost like you're
just by virtue
watching
of getting
yourself.
better. Yeah, I mean, like getting better at and more comfortable with things, and like
Mhm.
you said, getting better at like, or maybe I said I don't know, planning and preparing for things. As you get more skilled
Yeah.
at something, you learn more. Like, oh, like maybe we shouldn't go down this path for some project at work, and you maybe
Mhm.
convince the business not to go down a certain path because you've experienced a lot of suffering down that road before, and so maybe let's take the path that's a little bit less suffering,
Right.
so I think you're able to mitigate some of that, and you're not going to
Mhm.
eliminate it entirely, but you're going to get better at reducing that, and like I said, raising the
Yeah, that's
floor so it's
interesting you
not
bring that up.
as
It's
bad when you do suffer.
the goal, I think, for me is less to make it consistent and to plow down the peaks and fill in the valleys, but more to be like it's like training, right? Like you're training to climb mountains and summit and then dive into canyons and all these things and come back up. It's less about avoiding the peaks and the valleys and normalizing and equalizing them. It's more about training your metaphorical lungs and muscles and heart to be able to
Yeah,
go up and down and up and down, um, so you
don't wish
can
for an
really
easy life,
appreciate them.
wish for the strength to endure a difficult one, or
Where's
however
that
that saying
from? I've
goes.
heard that one.
I don't know, I've heard it attributed to Bruce Lee, but I don't think he's the one that said it. It's probably he was a philosophy student, so it was probably something from like Socrates, or I don't know, pick a
Yeah,
famous philosopher somewhere
I
sometime.
Google it, and it keeps coming up Bruce Lee. So I guess
Yeah,
practically Bruce Lee is probably the. But yeah,
yeah.
don't pray for an easy life. Pray for what is it?
Pray for the strength to endure a difficult one, and I
Oh
think
yeah, there it is.
again, it kind of leads to that sense of the suffering is going to be there, the cycles are going to be there, and one thing that helps, like in a work setting, is just I don't know, sometimes it's reframing things, celebrating more of the wins, and both in thought and in action,
Yeah.
whether that means like throwing a party or whatever, any of the bad things that happen rather than, and this could probably be attributed to parenting as well, as like use the bad as a teaching experience rather than a
A
end of the world
punishment.
scenario.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then there's all sorts of other things of like surrounding yourself with a lot of people that you can rely on, like a really solid team. When I was on production
Yeah.
support, having people that you can rely on,
I
such that when you feel comfortable when a problem comes to you, you can tackle it. It's not necessarily you
mhm.
specifically. You take that burden off of yourself, and you become maybe more of a director or a manager. I mean, like for me,
Yeah.
it was still I was still doing the work. I was still the person in charge of fixing whatever it was. But in some instances, I could be more of a director and say, "Oh, here's a problem. I don't know about this. I know this guy does. I know this guy does." Bring them in and say, "What are we going to do about this?" And sometimes I delegated work to other people. It's like, "Hey, can you go
Yeah.
take care of this?" It became a lot easier for me because then it's like, again, I'm reframing that,
So
and in my head, I'm confident any solution that or any problem that comes up that I'll be able to
mhm.
me slash my team will be able to solve it.
And by staying, you can achieve that kind of state of like continuous success by being open
Mm-hmm.
to the peaks and the valleys and the
Yeah.
challenges that come with experiences and all that stuff. It's funny you describe that because like when I think about the esports project that I've been working on for the last 3 years with folks, um, that's kind of how it is, right? Like we have an entire network of staff and coaches that we rely on to accomplish things, and I've done and I have been a part of each step in the process, but I'm not solely responsible or solely accountable for all of those processes. Now we have a network, and
Mm-hmm.
what you were describing just makes me think of like the kitchen and stuff where it's, if you're, when I was working food service, I wasn't in the back house, I was front of house, but like you have a guy for everything, and
Mm-hmm.
everyone is the guy for a couple things, and there's this
Yeah.
overlap. And when you've got a team that when the team is just working right, front of
Yeah.
house, back house doesn't matter. Um, you have enough coverage and enough like, and a lot of times this coverage of skill sets and aptitudes and is born from the attitude of go out and fuck up, right? Go out and just
Mhm.
mess up, learn, figure it out. And it's a manager's job a lot of times, I think. And it's the organization's job to, for an organization to be successful, is to encourage the fuck around, find out stuff, right? The go
Right.
mess up, go learn what's going on, go try to do this and do better. Because that's how you just get to a successful organization is by learning on
Yeah.
you study in the plan, but you have to go and do the stuff. You have to go do the stuff, break things, learn how
Mhm.
they work from the inside out. Um,
It's such
and
a
not a
great
lot of
feeling too to
oh, it
be on
feels
like
so
that kind
good.
of team, and it's
Yeah.
just like, and you know, for you, you know, personally, when you can get to that point where you're that again, like production support thing was tough. You know, it was
Mhm.
like every day, multiple issues,
Oh yeah.
and you were lucky to resolve all of them by the end of the day, or even just research them to figure out what the root cause is, and you'd catch up, and the next day was the same thing over and over again. It was really frustrating, but like I said, you get this sort of, I don't know, there's a certain sense of confidence where you're not even really thinking about or feeling the sense of the valleys
Would you say you're
per
present?
se.
Like you're right here in the moment, focusing on the
Yeah,
thing that needs to get done? Because all the worry about the outcome is like not a worry at all. Because you know you're gonna
right,
you have a team and an environment and a whole network that's gonna
right,
resolve this somehow, and you know it's
right.
gonna get resolved. You know you're gonna, you know you might be in the valley now and the stress and the anxiety of it all, but you also know that given the circumstances and given the things and work that you and your team have done, you're gonna get the peak and then you're gonna get on the valley on the other side, and that's okay. So you're just
Hmm.
present. You're right here and focused.
I would even argue that if you don't even, if it doesn't feel like a valley, is it a valley? You know? Um,
It's all relative and like kind of
yeah,
retrospective, right? Like I feel
yeah.
like you can. Oh, dude. Mm. Ah,
It
there's
becomes a
something.
real tangible issue if you're like, oh, this is a valley, it really sucks, versus if you're just kind of like, oh, another issue came in, gotta
Dude,
go
there's a
fix it.
song.
Yeah, all right.
100%. There was a song I was listening to on the road down from Oklahoma today. That basically hit this, and maybe it's similar to what you were just talking about. I think it's similar to what you're talking about with the Tom Hanks thing, where it's like you you gotta just
Oklahoma
appreciate.
too shall pass.
Oklahoma. Actually, you know what? I have come to really appreciate the last since I've been up through Oklahoma 3 times in the last 3 weekends. I have come to really appreciate the natural beauty of Oklahoma. Beautiful, beautiful place. In the Arbuckle Mountains and Wilderness. Great
Mm,
name, by the way. Arbuckle.
yeah.
That's hilarious. Beautiful. Oh my goodness. It's like it's like you took Appalachia and just slapped it in this like oak savanna of the southern Great Plains. It's so wild.
Nice.
It's cool as hell. It's a really cool area. Um, but yeah, it's basically just like how do you? Oh, I think it's how do I know the good times? How do I know if I'm in the good times without having to look back at them, right? Or
Mm,
something to that effect. I think it's a Zach Bryan country song. Doesn't matter.
sure.
But like there's that sentiment. I think there's a classic like snip from The Office where Michael or someone else is like, how do you know the good times when how can you know or it wasn't Michael, it was Andy or whatever, but it's like how do you know the good times when you're in it kind of thing. And
Hmm.
you don't really ever know when the good or the bad times are and whether the moments you are in are the good or the bad times. You can only really know that at the other end. But
Depends
if
on
you
how you
stop
frame it, I suppose, and feel about it. Yeah.
depends on how you frame it and how you feel about it after the fact. If you rely on how you feel about it after the fact to define it, you kind of give away control from
You
yourself
would.
now. I think there's
But you
value in
also miss the
saying like
moment too. I mean, if you
exactly. So
wait
just
until after, it's like, yeah.
every moment is a great moment,
Hmm.
whether it's happy, sad, painful, joyful, whatever. Every moment is a great moment as long as you are in the moment. And
Yeah.
the adage, I think, live in the moment, carpe diem. We might have talked about this last week too. I feel like I have a lot of the same conversations over and over again in my life.
Yeah.
Um, but like this whole carpe diem, live in the moment stuff, like gets kind of tossed aside as cliche because a lot of times you see it on like Instagram or social media, and it's the 22-year-old white kid or white girl going out and jumping off of a cliff into the blue, crystal blue
Yeah,
turquoise water, right? And it's like
yeah.
that's one actualization or one realization of that idea. But I think carpe diem, seize the day, live in the moment stuff can almost be more on a day to day level. Like it's a small thing. It's not big grand gestures, but it's little things of like when
Mhm.
you step outside your door and you just take a breath in of the fresh air, right? Maybe it's the day after, maybe it just rained and you're stepping out your door after the rain and you just breathe in and there's nothing else but the air of that earthy kind of wet air that comes from a good
Mhm.
rain, um, and nothing else is there, but you're just look focusing on that one sense. That's the present stuff, and it can also be, I think, defined by like the inverse of itself, right? Another way to help, I think for me, one of the things I work on trying to practice this idea of being present or seizing the day or whatever the hell you want to call it. It's like not worrying too much about 5 steps from now or 10 steps from now or tomorrow or the next day, but just
Yeah.
what's the next step? Where's my foot gonna land right now? Where are the dice gonna roll? Where have the dice rolled right now? And what's around me? What am I experiencing?
Yeah.
You have an adage about like sitting on a bench watching the cars go by that I kind of
Yeah.
think about a lot lately. In this way of how do you like practice being present without
Yeah.
spending $1,000 to go to like Maui or something.
Yeah, and jump off a cliff. Yeah,
Right.
I mean it's how many instances do you really have in your life that you really need to be? I mean, it's too many thoughts to have about this, but like, a lot of anxiety and all that, and some of depression, maybe more so anxiety, but is
All kind of
probably
connects.
an evolutional byproduct of being in like sub-Saharan Africa and being chased by a lion or something, where you're truly valuing your life in that moment.
Yeah.
We don't. I would say most of us probably don't have those moments consistently throughout our life. I mean, we for sure have them, and depending on
Mhm.
where you live and your economic status, it's much worse or not. But your average person is probably not in that sort of circumstance, and so it's like if you really reflect on how much you should be like feeling stressed about, and when I say feeling, I mean physically feeling that
Yeah.
feeling
The
of
tension in your
that thought,
muscles, the like tightness of your joints, the
right? Translating that thought into the biochemical reactions that need to happen. It's not really a lot that you should be
Mhm.
feeling that stressed about.
Yeah.
And I think framing it that way, I've been thinking about that a ton lately. For sure there's some things that you should think about and plan for far enough out, so that you're not starving to death or freezing in your home in Iowa
Yeah.
in the middle of winter, stuff like that.
Yeah,
But once
highly
you,
recommend just, leaving as a strategy.
yeah, well, that might help. But once you figured out and planned for some of those things outside of that, you reminded me of something interesting I thought of.
Once
Kind
you've
of reminds
loaded
me of
those
the
dice and you're about to roll them.
yeah the thing about cliched sayings. It's really interesting. It's the same thing as those motivational Instagram posts or whatever,
Mhm.
and it's like I don't know if you've ever felt this, but it's a really weird kind of cyclical happening with those kinds of sayings and those cliches because they're sayings for a reason. It's almost like an hourglass shape where it's like there's a lot of thoughts and feelings and experiences that kind of distill down into the saying
Yeah.
that represents all of those things, and that's that kind of bottleneck. And then it gets transmitted to people as this little saying like "carpe diem," and you're like, well, what the hell? Like it's so stupid and cliche. But then you hear it, and then like we've been talking about, you kind of have these experiences, and you've been thinking about it more, and it
That
kind of
reinforced it to
opens
a degree.
yeah, it opens itself back up into embodying those sorts of
Yeah.
experiences again, like kind of an hourglass shape, where it
Yeah.
becomes something more than that term, which is what it was meant to be in the first place. It's the same thing when you're
Yeah.
like you distill something before you communicate with somebody else,
I
but it's
love
still
that.
it's so weird and silly. It's like cliche to
Yeah.
hear it, but then it's like, oh yeah,
So
that
one of the
there is
things
no software
about
got that.
it's one of the things about
Yeah.
so cliche, I think I would argue cliche is another way of trying to like kill the author almost. Where
Could
or
be.
not necessarily kill the author, but it's a similar like, death of the author idea of like it's a calling something cliche. What is the point of calling something cliche, right? I think it's to kind of try to undermine the value of it. Like, oh, this is rote, this is cliche. We've all heard this before. It doesn't, and that's fine. But if it's meant
Unless
in a
you give
way to like
something cooties.
which is like giving an idea cooties, like no, you don't want to touch this
Yeah,
idea.
I
I
heard that
think,
lately, and it's like that happens when you don't like somebody, but they've said something like factual, or you're like, oh, okay, that actually makes sense, but you don't like that person, and you don't want them to
yep,
come out of that.
yep.
You give them some cooties, and then nobody can touch them, and it's like,
hmm
sorry. Anyway,
No, no, that's kind of the
I'm getting
exact
the
thing. It's
thing.
just instead of it being a person, it's phrases and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
it's just it's interesting as like a device for understanding stuff, and
Hmm.
I think one of the things I'm trying to practice, and I've told you about my buddy Anthony's care less mindset. I'm gonna try to practice
Hmm.
that a little bit. It's like, hey, you know what? If it's cliche, but does it resonate
Yeah.
with me? Like
Yeah.
the only reason I think I should care if something is cliche is if well, there's almost no reason because cliche kind of, and I'm going to use this word until it means nothing. But it's like if I say this is cliche, that's just a statement of fact. And if someone else
Yeah.
is saying this thing's cliche, and I'm like, oh yeah, that is cliche. And if that makes me feel uncomfortable or weird or kind of like judgy, like, oh, this is a little, maybe it's too cliche, it's too sugary, it's not
Yeah.
substantive. Like, why do I feel that it's not substantive? Is it that this person is judging it and they don't feel it's substantive, so they call it cliche,
Yeah.
and now I feel self-conscious about like vibing with it? Because if that's the case, I gotta let that go. That doesn't matter, and it's
Yeah.
not they. It might be cliche and not and sugary to them, but it might be full of value and nutrition for me, and that's okay. That's totally fine. And it
Hmm.
goes to that care less thing, right? Like care a little
Yeah.
bit, care enough to get a grip on something, but then massage that out a little bit and just let it go for a second
Yeah.
and see like how you really feel. Because if I look at something, because there's a little bit of self judgment. I don't want to talk too much about like eh, past partners and stuff, but one of my past partners judged a city, a really nice city, but it's kind of a more metro modern, one of the bigger cities in the country, and she would call it it felt bougie and pretentious. It's like
Mm.
how does how does a city feel bougie and pretentious? And it was in a conversation about like possibly like me possibly want to like move out there and like let's go out there and all this other, and that had a whole underlying tension to it, right? Because we weren't on the same page about that at all.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a veneer, much like calling something cliche. There's a discomfort with
Yeah.
like the whole package of an idea, right? So the idea of the city, there's something discomforting about it for whatever reason. Um, and so the label of like bougie and pretentious was applied to it as a way to like just judge and dismiss it as not
Yeah.
part of her like value set or like a world, a future of her own. And that's totally fine. I just think it's like unfair to use the pretentious and other parts of it because that feels like a veneer with a whole lot of other stuff underneath it that doesn't actually really relate to the pretentious and other stuff. Like maybe you just want
Yeah.
to live in a smaller town. Maybe the big city kind of because it was a yuppie city, right? Like a lot of young up
Yeah.
and coming types, IT, modern industries, stuff like that. It had a very distinct Seattle esque vibe, um, and that's not for everybody. But
Sure.
here's the thing that I think I found the hook. The calling something cliche as a judgment or calling it this one town pretentious or whatever, that's like externalizing and blaming
Mm.
something else, the essence of something else for being itself instead of recognizing where your feelings about it come from and processing that.
Yeah.
Right? It's like taking ownership versus pushing blame. It's like this place is this and that's bad because it's that makes it X, Y, and Z. Whereas I see it as this and that's not my feeling, and it's okay that it's that way. I don't need to engage with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I wonder if it's I don't know this person, I've never met this person, and
Mhm.
I think for some people that's a way to kind of put something down. For other people, it's a way. For other people, it's maybe a lack of um, communication. Um, I don't have any other words
Yeah,
to describe it, but it could be that that's the only word they could think of at the time. That's how that came out at the time was this feels blank. And so rather than, in 2 seconds using a word to describe something or how you feel about something, maybe doesn't really get to what they actually feel about it. And so
but as
if
part of
this
it,
person, yeah, and so it might not have, not necessarily this circumstance, but sometimes it's not necessarily ill intended. It's more of just like maybe they meant to say that it's a bit yuppie or it's a bit fancy. You might go into some like ritzy place. And you're like, this is pretty fancy. You might use that what the
hmm
term that she used, but what you really mean to say is like, this is really fancy. This looks like it's really expensive. A lot of adjectives that you might use to describe that, but it's distilled into that one word, and so
yeah.
perhaps it's not ill intended. Maybe it
And then there's
is.
the inefficiency, right? Like there's the
Yeah.
inefficiency of conversation, right? Like I read that in all the biases and all the perceptions. I have all of my perceptions, and I'm applying, and without having to like
Yeah.
before even diving into that, I just hear that and I'm applying all the things that I think might be a part of it that,
Yeah.
like you're saying, might not even be a part of that statement at all. And so that
Right.
requires conversation and diving into the depths of it if we were to understand that. That's where the nuance of like the letting go of someone else's judgment about a thing when they say
Mm-hmm.
it's cliche or it's
Yeah.
pretentious or it's bougie or whatever. It's like people
It
will say
could.
stuff
Yeah.
like
And I
that's
suppose it all depends on the context of the
yeah.
person in the discussion too. So one thing, if you don't mind me jumping off on to
Go
the
for it.
with a talking point that I've thought about and tried to embody a lot lately is not necessarily just the not caring part. There's a certain element of that is good. There's so like the way you felt and responded is certain expectations that you hold about something, your thoughts and feelings about something. Um, and so, yeah, for sure, one thing you can do is maybe let go. One thing is maybe to explore, like you kind of mentioned, and this is not directed towards you, but just the
No, just broadly.
royal we you, um, is to kind of explore feeling more comfortable disagreeing with people, and
Yeah.
sort of so a lot of I'm having trouble saying it, but it comes down to a lot
So,
of like being comfortable in your own thoughts and processes
mhm,
and feelings, and having the boundaries and not having what somebody else says determine how you feel. So if
right.
somebody says this is cliche or this is bougie or whatever, that is a particular moment that could be triggering because you have certain thoughts and feelings about it. But one thing that I've been trying to practice lately, I think I've been successful, is to kind of just take that input and think, embody this inside, but take this attitude and go, oh, that's interesting. Not to say like, well, that, like not to have
Right.
a
That's
not to
interesting. Why
have, yeah, not to have a response kind of like positive or negative, but it's like, oh, that's interesting. Like, let's explore
Oh
this a
my
little bit.
goodness.
And so then I've been able to, here, I'll wrap up real quickly, but basically,
No, you're good. You're good.
I've been able to kind of take that and sit with that and say, like, oh, well, I don't really feel one way or another about this. It's just something they said. And so I'm going to sit here and say, I might even say that, like, oh, that's interesting. I disagree. Or I might say, like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. Explain. And so what that's led to in a lot of cases is me not getting emotionally charged about something and
hmm
listening to somebody else
But still
discuss
being able to like
something.
challenge something that's maybe vague, ambiguous, or
Yeah.
strongly opinionated, and wanting to
And
understand where that came from.
maybe like in your case, it's explained that like, oh, maybe I shouldn't use that word. What I really meant was this.
hmm
It feels like it's this to me. I don't have a problem with that. And so
Yeah.
maybe somebody is saying that
So
something is bougie isn't because they have a problem with it. It's because they maybe lacked the like ability to communicate what they really meant in those 2 seconds, and they
yeah,
said the
absolutely.
wrong thing,
I
perhaps.
have
And
two
yeah,
two thoughts. The context I was the city and the pretentious stuff, is to branch off that a little bit. One of the challenges there was there is a conversation under the conversation, right? Which is unfair to both myself and my ex, in that circumstance, because like I was mentioning it with almost an ulterior motive, like, hey, this is a cool place to maybe go move to for a
Mm,
while because I wanted, one of my goals, and is not
yeah.
unambiguous, is that I want to travel and go live other places. And so there was that. And so I said one thing with this whole gross mess of an iceberg underneath it. And then her response, recognizing all of that, the text and
Yeah.
the subtext being massive, she recognized that, and then she had her whole subtext and discomfort with the city and all these other things, and responded in this way. And then we tried like talking at this level, and it just led to a lot of tension. And so that conversation didn't
Yeah.
really go the right direction because it wasn't. We were having we were having this conversation, but it was really this that we were talking
Yeah.
about,
Yeah.
and we never made
Yeah.
this the conversation effectively, which could have been done with something a little bit more detached, not necessarily detached in a bad way, but like more reserved, kind of like what you're talking about, not necessarily putting the
Yeah.
emotion into it. It was tough because we were both emotionally involved in the conversation. Flip side, at work, one of the things I've been really trying to practice is, when presented with information,
Hmm.
the job, the circumstance we're in, since we're both learning, everyone on our team is learning a lot. The challenge is we're asking a lot of questions, getting a lot of answers. And
Yeah.
one of the things I'm trying to practice is just not necessarily having to feign understanding or not understanding, and just be right down
Yeah.
the middle, right? I don't know if this makes any
Yeah.
sense between understanding and not
Yes.
understanding, and somewhere in the middle of like just being like, I don't, to the point of being able to say, I don't have a response to that. Like that being an okay, finding a way to
Yeah.
communicate that, and
It's
then what
honest.
that, yeah, and it takes practice because like
Hmm.
I'm so used to trying to say, "Oh, I get it," or "Oh man, I really don't get it," and this is the part I don't get so much anymore. Is I'm realizing that like, and this it's helped me a lot in the last several weeks. Is like there's parts that I do get, parts that I don't get, but so much of it's just in this black box that I don't understand, and I need. It's
Yeah.
almost like just keep talking. Like, hey, I'm hearing you. I'm not getting
Yeah.
any of it, or I don't get what I'm not getting, and I don't get what I am getting. Just
Yeah.
keep on going, or something.
Maybe you'll say something that actually clicks, and then things will
Yeah,
start working. Yeah.
and trying to
The
like
thing.
practice that without having the like emotional positive, like the emotional
Yeah.
reception of like I get it or I don't get it, but could you, anyways.
And maybe and I'll phrase this as a statement, but it'll come out as a question eventually. The thing about like the somebody saying so what you had said about somebody saying something's cliche, and you hear that, and you are at a crossroads where you can say and feel and think the same that they do,
Hmm.
just to not be disagreeable and to make everything comfortable and fine and all that. And I think for people like me and you and people that are empathetic, that's maybe their sort of habit is to kind of be like, oh well, maybe I should be agreeable to that,
Right.
because then there's maybe some sort of bonding that I have with this person, whatever the
Or
reason
like
is behind
sometimes like
that.
it clicks where like I get why it would be like why they're saying that, and I get the logic, and that logic seems
Yeah,
like there's
you can
sometimes I have
understand it
some,
but not
yeah.
agree with it,
Yeah,
and
like I
so
understand,
then
I don't agree with it, and like maybe I feel like I'm the child or like the immature one
right.
for not agreeing with it.
But if you say that, so what you said just now is the truth, and it's an
Hmm.
honest reaction that would be representative of what you actually think about it. And so sometimes out of habit, or maybe a lot of times, the response is oftentimes like, "Oh yeah," and then you say that you understand, and you kind of like confirm what they're saying to them as there's something else that does that. But what I was saying, was saying earlier about practicing a lot is just to say, to take that and sit on that and say like, I don't have to be that person. I can set. I'm trying to become more of myself, and some that's just
Hmm.
setting those types of boundaries up that
Yeah.
says that came over in my direction. It's like, yeah, that's interesting. Like, is that something I want to let in or not? And tying that in with how often things actually should trigger you to be stressed
Well,
out about
at the
them.
same time, like,
And since it's not often, you could say, ah, that's interesting. I don't agree with that. And then what's
And
the worst that happens?
you
You have a
can
discussion about it. Like,
engage, yeah, you
okay,
can
I
discuss
agree.
and you can engage. Like, my disagreement, we don't have to agree, really.
Yeah.
And the reason that there is disagreement, and that's not necessarily like, the fact of it is that there's like Carpe Diem sees the day, the community episode, like number 3, right, with that professor doing whatever. um like, that is definitively cliche, but how we feel
Mhm.
about it, how we internalize it, and how we value the sentiment of the phrase and the fact that it's cliche, um can be different, and we don't necessarily have to internalize it the same. And it can
Yeah.
be, that's where the conversation comes in, and being able to get past the judgment stage of like, hey, that's cliche, and like, cliche is not cool, bro. That's like childish and immature, and like, to be really mature is to be nihilistic or whatever, right? Or
Yeah.
that's my perspective. But like, to get past that, be like, that's interesting you say that. D I kinda, you can approach that, like, let's use this as an example, like, interesting you say it's a cliche. I agree. I think it is cliche. I think it's been used a lot, but I also, interestingly, like, it resonates with me. And then you can start discussing about, like, why it resonates with me and maybe why it doesn't, or the fact that it is cliche makes it not resonate with you or doesn't do anything for you.
Mhm.
And then there we can have that discussion and get to understand things and have a good time, because like, instead of being in this situation where we're maybe having like an where we have the text and all the subtext of like, the subtext is, I don't want to appear or identify as like lesser valued person that's not matured and developed or developing, and I'm a child, or I need to, right, like, that's not even a worthwhile conversation, and that's just our ego
Mhm.
kind of getting in the way of things. And if we can just kind of put that
Yeah.
aside and acknowledge that what we see is what we see, and how it makes us feel is different, but the fact that neither of us feel the exact same about the thing that we're seeing, like, that's not a problem. Let's explore why we
Yeah.
each feel that way, without the need for both of us to feel the same at the end of this conversation.
Right. I wonder if there's and I'm interested to get your thoughts on what you think about this, but what leads people to do that? Is there a sense
Fuck, I don't
of
know, man.
so my thought is there's probably a sense of so there's a sense of attachment there. I don't know if like not to get into the childhood
Yeah.
trauma thing, but there's perhaps a learned behavior of uh tr- shaping yourself to the other person so
Yeah,
that
I think about this a lot with
you
my
maintain that
romantic
attachment.
relationships,
Hmm.
where like um, will pick and choose or tailor how I deliver things and how I feel about things and how I feel about other
Yeah.
people and ideas and express myself and all these things based around how the other person judges the world and how I understand
Yeah.
them to judge the world, because I like
You don't
them
want
or
to lose
value
that.
something and I want to be like on the same page. And this might be some pop
Yeah.
psychology bullshit. I don't know, man. But that's kind of where my head goes. And
Well, it's an
I've
attachment, right? And then it's a
yeah.
fear of loss of the attachment. So it's you do those things to uh create
But
that
the only way we
attachment,
lose
and
it
then
is
once
by
you've bonded.
the only way we lose it is if we are afraid of losing it and
Mhm.
consider it something that can be lost. When I think it's healthier, like what we were maybe alluding to here, where it's like, it doesn't matter that we see, like, you can maintain. Me, one of my best friends, me and Sean, we see the world very differently.
Mhm.
And like, one example is like, money systems and capitalism and stuff like that. Like, I'm still formulating how I see the world, and it's changing and stuff, and so is he. And but like, we just see very different worlds when it comes to like an ideal, something more ideal. I see a
Mhm.
world without money, and I think sees a world with money. Neither of which is bad, and we've had these discussions, but like, we're still really really good friends,
Yeah.
and we can have this conversation. We can have this dissonance about like this moral quandary or whatever, and that doesn't have to just like, we don't have to judge each other for it, and we've let go
Yeah.
of the worry about the judgment, and by letting go of that, we don't judge each other. It's kind of like a chicken egg almost, where like, he's only
Yeah.
going to judge me if I'm worried about him judging me, and if I'm just put myself out there vulnerably, honestly, and transparently, there's nothing to judge because that's just what it is. Or if he does
Well,
judge it negatively and doesn't like it,
I
then
think
he doesn't have to be my friend anymore. And
he's only gonna judge you if he's gonna judge you, not whether you think he's gonna judge you or not. Like that's an independent happening outside
yeah,
of
that's a good
you.
way to put it.
And so I think what needs to happen is, again, for people that are more empathetic or whatever, that are kind of like that, is to have more faith that um, you won't lose somebody if you disagree with them, and you need a lot more practice with
Yeah,
healthy relationships that are like that. That you can say, I
that.
don't agree with that, and not if you are in a relationship,
Mhm.
whether that's significant other, family, friendship, whatever,
Any connection
that
with another
you
person.
feel that risk, that's probably not a good. You either need to talk about it, you need to address
Yeah.
it and say, look, this is how I feel, or that's probably not a good relationship for you to be in. If you can get out of it, you probably want to. You
One
want to
of
be in a healthy relationship where you can disagree, and
yeah.
that's with certain exceptions. Like if you're with somebody that you're dating and like
Mhm.
you disagree about having kids, that might be something that
You
you
should
should
have a
separate
conversation
for.
about
Well, I mean,
that.
it might be something
Yeah.
that is qualitative enough that it's worth not being with that person. Those things aside, you need those kinds of practices. I think for me personally, it can be harder. I was gonna say it can be harder with somebody you're dating, uh, to you want to shape yourself, like you said, shape yourself to that person
Yeah.
more. Whereas friends and family, sometimes it's like you can usually fall back on, like, they'll be there if even
Yeah.
if you get into heated argument. But with a significant other, it's kind of like,
It is tougher.
what if they leave me? It's like, oh yeah, that's right. Okay, I'll date somebody
But
else that
going back
I don't have those
to
problems with.
going back to the like if you're afraid to lose something, you've kind of already lost it, right? In the relationship, like if
Hmm.
you're afraid that you're going to lose connection with this person, if you are a little bit more like vulnerable about how you feel and think about things, there's two-way street, right? Like you don't trust yourself and you don't trust them, and then without that trust, the relationship is already kind of gone, and you're fearing the loss because you know it's not there to begin with. And it doesn't mean it can't be there. It just means you have to accept and take that like that blind step, that one step, and like nothing
Yeah.
else. This goes back to the one of the first concepts we are talking about tonight with that ancillary justice quote, where it's like it's always and always has been and always will be the only the next step. There's only ever the one
Hmm.
step after the other. Like the
Yeah.
the relationship, the change to your relationship with this person, whether it's your partner or a friend or a family member, none of that actually matters. None of that exists. The only thing is you are here, and there's the things you can say next,
Hmm.
and you can think about all these things, and you can mitigate all those things by loading the dice with how you are going to deliver this thing and how vulnerable you're going to be. You might lose the relationship if you, or with time if you aren't truly vulnerable. Or if you might lose that relationship if you're so vulnerable you're crass in how you deliver it, right? And you hurt their
Hmm.
feelings in the process. That's how you deliver that. In this circumstance is how you're loading the dice. And how you load those dice is going to generally guide the needle, but at the same time, you can't control where those dice land. Ultimately, you can only mitigate as much as you can. So you roll the dice and you take that step and see what happens.
Yeah.
And if you let go of the outcome, you just have some trust in yourself and some confidence in those around you, right? To be human beings,
Hmm.
like trust yourself to not be. One of the things I have to work on. I'm talking a lot for myself here. I gotta trust myself not to be an idiot. I have a lot of thoughts. I know I'm an idiot sometimes, but like just because I think something, and this is it's a weird thing. Like when I think something, and I think it's like when I have an idea about something or I make something or whatever, I do not think it is valuable inherently. Like it's like
Hmm.
because I thought it, right? Like, you know, Van Gogh made incredible art or whatever, right? Did he sit there and be like, "Yep, that's incredible" or whatever? Or maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Doesn't matter. But the point is like Van Gogh was as much in his head cutting his ear off and stuff as I am sitting here not saying the things I want to say. So like I lost the point of that. But the point is, trust yourself a little bit and be vulnerable and take that next step and trust those around you to be responsive. And if they're not going to be responsive, then something out of your control is kind of like,
Yeah.
and that sucks. That's painful to have those realizations that someone is not actually the person that you kind of thought they were, or was as supportive of you, or as you know, genuine with you as you wanted them to be. But now you know. Now you work through it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Learning
the loading the
experience.
dice and how you deliver that and taking that
Yeah.
step, that's the only way to really work through those things. Man,
Yeah.
we've been talking a lot tonight. It's an hour 23 in.
Man, we blew by.
Flew
All right,
by.
Mark.
Um, I think it's time for some last thoughts before we wrap up for the evening. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, I
I
think so.
am trying to get through in these next 2 weeks 4 more books, of which I am
Jeez.
most of the way through two, through three of them, and then partially the way through a fourth one to get to my 10 books for the year.
Ooh.
Uh, we're gonna get there event like kind of. I didn't really 10 books for the year is kind of silly because it's basically 6 books for the last 3 months or less. Um, but trying to do it right now. I'm reading Medium Raw by Anthony Bourdain, and I'm almost done with that. That's like
Nice.
follow up, yes, to Kitchen Confidential, and then I'm reading this big stupid book about Mongolian history and the impact it had on the modern world. That one's fascinating, and I have some thoughts about that. And when I finish it, I want to talk to you about it because it's interesting. Um,
Okay.
and then I'm reading Aldo Leopold, and then the sequel to Neuromancer, which is a cyberpunk book. But
Nice.
that's kind of where my world's at. That's kind of what the next couple weeks is gonna have for me. What you up to, man?
You need to start watching Devil's Hour, man.
Hey, you know what? I probably will. I probably will while I'm
Because
cooking and stuff.
I keep having these thoughts and I keep wanting to talk to you about them, but I don't want to ruin the show for you. And I
Okay.
think they'd be great philosophical
I will
conversations to
try to
have for
watch
our
one
show.
episode at least this week.
Yeah, and I'm sure I'll get you hooked. But there's only 6, so watch one, then you only got 5 left.
Oh, that's right. Is this on Prime?
Yes.
Yes,
Yep.
that's right. We talked about this.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, it'll definitely draw you in for sure. I'm not really up to any reading other than I'm reading up on schematics for washers and dryers.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
I've got not to get too technical, but I'm basically hacking my washer and dryer. I set up a
Is it to
notification
make them
system.
smart, or is it because they're
Yeah,
broken?
basically.
Okay.
Well, so I think I told you I made a laundry notification system. That's one of my videos on my channel.
Yeah.
Works pretty well. This is a vibration sensor or whatever. And I don't know. It's gonna take some more refinement, but I'm just kind of like I'm over it. And so um the more efficient route is for me to basically bust open my washer and dryer, and I'm gonna hardwire something in, and like I said, without going into too much detail. So I'm figuring that out. I'm doing a lot of learning about different things. I'm going to be jumping into trying some resin epoxy type
Ooh.
work.
Ooh.
Um, Probably next week or two. One of
That'll
my
be fun.
upcoming projects. So yeah, I got set up my laser engraver. Just a lot of like engineering kind of things I'm trying to
Yeah.
tackle. But
Well,
yeah,
awesome.
I wish I was getting more into the book reading and like philosophical stuff. But
Comes just like with
I get
anything, it comes in cycles, right?
yeah. Well, I get a lot of through TV nowadays, so
I yeah, that's an interesting topic to talk about too. We should add that to our backlog of possible topics. Um,
Which idea?
which is consuming y- mindful and philosophically consuming media, right? Like it's not just books, it's not just
Mm.
books, but TV shows and other like art forms. How do we like what are I have a lot of thoughts about it, and like I've consumed a lot of different media and taken away a lot of like life lessons and things like that from a lot of different stuff, from sitcoms to dramatic movies to anime and books and comic books and all these things. They're all valid. It's the
Mm.
validity of these things
Yeah.
that I was thinking we could talk about. But nonetheless, we are very well deep into this episode. And I think it's a good time to go ahead and
Indeed.
call it.
I
Of
agree.
where do we go from here, or whatever we end up calling it if it changes. But this
Yeah.
was a great episode. It's a great chat. Steve, it was great talking to you,
Yeah.
and talk to you next weekend.
All right. Later.
See ya.